Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Paul Rose, and in this short presentation I'd like to talk about conservation biology and its role in the management of ex situ populations of threatened species, how we can better understand the conservation relevance of species that we house in populations under human care, so they are viable and sustainable and can therefore be used in wild world conservation efforts for those species. Numerous accredited zoos house populations of highly threatened animals. These are black rhino, a critically endangered species, with a wild population of around about 5,500 individuals. Within the European Zoo region, black rhinos are managed as an EEP, a European Endangered Species Programme. A critically endangered species is one that the IUCN considers to be of extreme risk of extinction within the near future. That future is measured over generation times for that particular species. As of 2020, 6,811 species are considered to be critically endangered. The management of such species within populations in human care is therefore vital to prevent the extinction of these important parts of biodiversity. Within the European Zoo region, or EAZA, EEPs, the European Endangered Species Programme, aims to actively manage and breed populations of threatened species, such as the critically endangered black rhino, to ensure the zoo population is both viable and sustainable and could be useful for future reintroduction projects. An EEP is the highest level of population management that a species would be under. The selection of individuals for breeding is carefully controlled by the studbook holder and various population managers. A coordinated international breeding programme for the black rhinoceros was first set up in 1966, and it's been incredibly successful. Individuals within these populations housed in human care are selected for breeding so they promote adaptive traits, key founder genes that would be useful to life in the wild, and will have the best bloodlines to ensure fertility and viability of the future generations of this species wherever it is housed. Because the zoo population of black rhinoceros is so important, this species has been actively managed to ensure that the husbandry provided for all individuals in zoos best meets their evolutionary ecology and behavioural needs. Consequently, the black rhinoceros is one of the few species within the EAZA region to have been provided with a set of best practice guidelines. Best practice guidelines distill all of the information from across all holders of these species and select the best practice that promotes reproduction, promotes longevity, and promotes animal health and well-being. Best practice guidelines are an essential part of conservation biology in the zoo. Without species-specific husbandry, it's simply not possible to propagate and breed individuals for population sustainability. Zoos around the world take part in coordinated conservation projects that usually involve a range of partners in the field as well as partners in ex situ collections. This is a Guam rail housed at the Lincoln Park Zoo. Guam rails are a nice example of a species that can only be housed by accredited Association of Zoo and Aquarium (AZA) zoos across North America. This guarantees certain degrees of husbandry standards for good animal health and welfare, and all holders of the Guam rail must participate in active conservation efforts to save this species from extinction. The Guam rail comes from an island. It is a specialised population of birds in a very small number of individuals. Such island populations are often at heightened risk of extinction because of their limited heterozygosity within the genes that they carry in their population, because they have been so specialised and so restricted in number for a particular type of habitat. In the case of the Guam rail, this specialisation is its flightlessness, having evolved without ground predators. The Guam rail disappeared from some of its range in the 1970s and was extirpated from the entire island of Guam in the 1980s. Efforts to reintroduce the Guam rail to the original island and to neighbouring islands to establish a backup sustainable population have been occurring since the 1990s, and this has been met with some success, but it's only been thanks to coordinated efforts across zoos and other conservation organisations. The coordinated efforts of zoos and wild world population organisations has seen the Guam rail being only the second bird after the California condor to be reclassified by the IUCN from extinct in the wild to critically endangered. Other birds, such as the Micronesian kingfisher and the Bali myna, are also island specialists, are also under extreme threat of extinction in the wild, and are the subject of coordinated intense zoo conservation breeding actions. Without the role of zoos in managing bloodlines, in managing populations, and in keeping stud books, so individuals who are founders and individuals who are breeding are known, these populations of these species would no longer exist. The role of zoos and the role of ex situ populations, those housed in human care, has become under more scrutiny as their importance grows during the current biodiversity crisis. The Conservation Planning Specialist Group of the IUCN has recently developed the One Plan approach to conservation, which sees the role of zoo populations as central to future conservation success. The IUCN's Red List is incredibly useful when it comes to developing conservation action. Assessment of the number of individuals remaining in a population and the threats and the likelihood that threats will continue to cause declines in a population can be used as a guide for active management of both zoo and wild populations, and this active management can be documented into an action plan with the aim of reversing declines, promoting sustainability of population, and encouraging habitat management, as well as engaging stakeholders, local people, and all key interested parties in the conservation efforts of that species in its native range states. The Asian Wild Cattle Specialist Group, for example, that work extensively in Indonesia on species like the banteng, have published national guidelines, national action plans for the continued conservation of such species that involve IUCN red listing, that involve the knowledge of local people in the area, and that have taken on board information and expertise on all those who have worked with, managed or researched the banteng to ensure the best successful outcomes of such national conservation action planning. So what is the One Plan approach to conservation? One Plan involves all of those with an active interest in the conservation and the outcomes of conservation for that species. These could be conservation experts, conservation biologists, wildlife managers, field and zoo biologists, those that manage populations of that species, landowners, government agencies and NGOs within the range states of the animal, as well as the local people and any other important stakeholders that are actively involved or could have an influence over the conservation success and the outcomes of that conservation program for that particular species. All of the expertise and knowledge from all of those individuals is fed into an integrated species conservation strategy, and this involves captive and wild world individuals. Captive population management can enable key conservation roles to be met by that species wherever it is housed in human care. Conservation action for wild populations ensures the sustainability and viability of that population within its native range states. This is a sliding scale of management between the wild world and the human care world of the zoo. The individuals within the zoo and the individuals within the wild should both benefit each other by both supporting the overall outcomes and aims of this integrated conservation action. And ultimately, a one-plan approach has a common goal of ensuring a viable population of a species that is thriving within healthy ecosystems. The individuals housed within human care in the zoo and the individuals that live out in the wild are both as equally as important. This sliding scale of management is done on a species by species case. How much involvement is needed in the wild? How much involvement is needed in the zoo? And consequently, conservation action is therefore most species appropriate when it involves all of that information from all of those individuals who are actively engaged with species conservation, who know about the animal's needs in the wild, who know about the threats to that species in the wild, and who know about that animal's needs in captivity, how to breed it, how to manage it, how to ensure that it's going to remain as similar in its adaptive capacities as it can to the wild individuals that are living freely. This paper in Zoo Biology by Traylor Holzer and colleagues explains how zoos can move forward with a one-plan approach for particular taxonomic groups. It explains how integrated collection planning and assessments can be useful to zoos considering the role of species within their collections and how those species support both zoo-based and field-based conservation efforts. This paper identifies potential roles that ex situ species management can play in the overall conservation of that particular species. For example, ex situ management could help address the causes of primary threats. It could help offset the impact of primary or stochastic threats to a particular population. It could also buy time for a population if that wild population is within severe decline. And it can help restore wild populations once these primary threats have been significantly addressed. The role of collection planning in ensuring that zoos work together to not only rationalise animal collections, but also pool knowledge and resources, is one of the best ways that zoo populations can be made sustainable, so that they will have both real-time impact on wild world and zoo-based conservation action. Collaboration between accredited zoos within the big zoo organisations has made real conservation impact. This wonderful bird is a white-rumped shama. The white-rumped shama is renowned for his beautiful liquid song. Sadly, this puts him and several other species of songbird at risk of extinction due to what's been known as the Asian songbird crisis. Catching of such birds in their native range states, selling them in bird markets, where they're often used in singing competitions by unscrupulous individuals to make money on who is the best songster. This has severely depleted the wild populations of these wonderful animals. Zoos, NGOs, and conservation bodies have come together to collectively determine the best conservation strategy to protect the Asian songbirds from such exploitation. Traffic, which is a leading NGO that works globally on the trade in wild animals and plants to ensure conservation of biodiversity and sustainable development, has provided some brilliant graphics and educational material on the problems facing the Asian songbirds. And within EASA, the Silent Forest campaign has seen zoos band together to not only promote the Asian songbirds that they have in their collections, but has also seen ornithological experts travel out to Southeast Asia to provide help, assistance and resources in the fight against the Asian songbird trade, beautifully linking together the ex situ populations of these birds within zoos with on-the-ground conservation in the animal's native range states. Successful conservation takes planning, time, active engagement, and of course money. But when all of those things together, conservation really can be successful. These are trumpeter swans. Trumpeter swans in the 1930s were facing a very bleak future. Only 70 wild birds were known to exist. And it is only thanks to coordinated efforts by zoos around the world, but particularly those in the AZA region, working with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, that have been able to ensure the trumpeter swan population is now self-sustaining. Trumpeter swans can be seen in animal collections around the world. A great example of how zoos have spread out the genetic material of such endangered species to not put, bad pun coming, to not put all of their eggs in one basket. The trumpeter swan conservation story is a really nice example of why conservation work takes time. Many AZA zoos still breed trumpeter swans and are still involved in the field conservation, assisting with wetland management and bird ringing schemes. Such ringing and monitoring schemes are vital to our understanding of how successful conservation action has been. The original reintroductions of the trumpeter swan, when its decline was first noted, met with limited success and with limited population growth. Birds stopped migrating, and a suitable habitat for reintroductions was scarce. But continued management, continued observation of the species, and continued intervention where necessary meant that in more recent years the trumpeter swan population has boomed, and consequently increasing growth rates suggest that conservation is more than just putting the animal back into the wild. For conservation to be successful, the animal must be monitored, the population must be augmented with individuals consistently, and animals that have been reintroduced must be provided with the right types of resources so that their whole life history can be played out back in the wild. It's not just a case of putting back young birds in hoping they will breed. It's ensuring that those young birds that have been put back are successfully managed, can develop properly, and can find their own niche within that larger habitat. So the success of the Trumpeter Swan project is down to the continued efforts of zoos that have been involved across a very large number of years, not just at the start, but of continued monitoring and of continued conservation action. It's essential for zoo populations to change and for conservation work to become fully embedded into collection planning. Relics of the past like keeping white tigers for public interest and entertainment, do nothing for the conservation work that is so sorely needed for the wild counterparts of these colour mutations. Zoos and accredited institutions should focus their efforts on coordinated captive breeding, on ensuring that boots on the ground conservation work can be fully supported by funding and resource that is generated by keeping such animals in captivity. The wild as we know it is becoming more and more squeezed, and free living animals are under increasing pressure from human encroachment. Whether or not you agree with zoos existing, without them, many populations of species would be in smaller numbers than they are now, and many species, like the tiger, would be facing a much greater threat of complete extinction. Consequently, a science-based approach to zoo animal management, a use of evidence in how such populations are managed, evidence from the wild, evidence of best practice, ensures that ex situ conservation efforts are most likely to be sustainable. And the cubs that you see playing in this video will have a real role in the future conservation efforts of zoos in ensuring that such populations can continue and can be sustainable into the future. The zoo cannot work by itself to fully be successful in its conservation mission. It must work with those out in the field, and it must engage with practitioners that are ensuring there are still wild places left for these animals to eventually go back into. The likelihood of these tigers going back into the wild in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in your children's or grandchildren's lifetime is slim. But the one plan approach gives these tigers a real value to wild living individuals. By ensuring that they have a role to play in the promotion of conservation, in the educational messaging around conservation, and in the conservation of the adaptive traits of the tiger, which, if ever they are completely lost in the wild, can be conserved in the zoo, because the zoo tiger can behave in the same way as the wild tiger. The zoo tiger really has a strong conservation relevance to all tigers wherever they are found. Conservation in the zoo is not just about big enigmatic species like tigers and trumpeter swans. Freshwater fish, for example, are considered some of the most threatened taxa on the planet. Wetland ecosystems are under mounting human pressures. Aquariums that house and breed such species have shown they are capable of coordinated conservation that really promotes the sustainability of such threatened populations. Husbandry techniques developed for species in captivity can be directly translated to populations of conservation concern. These are scorp, a diving duck. The management of diving ducks in captivity has been directly translated into field-based conservation for some of the world's rarest birds. The Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, based at Slimbridge Wetlands Centre, has been actively involved in the conservation of the Bayer's pochard, the duck with the green head, and of the Madagascar pochard, the bird with the ducklings in that photograph. The Madagascar pochard is considered the world's rarest bird currently. Trialling husbandry techniques for the rearing of Madagascar pochard, using diving ducks in its captive collections, has seen WWT and its partners successfully bring back a bird that was at the brink of extinction, of only a handful of individuals living in an unsuitable wetland. Breeding these individuals in captivity but in the range states of the bird has seen the release of ducklings which have grown up to then rear their own ducklings out in the wild. And the Bayer's pochard once common across its range, has silently disappeared and is now again threatened with extinction. This bird also exists in captive collections. The breeding and rearing coordinated breeding program efforts of WWT and of other living collections around the world has seen to determine the best quality individuals for coordinated conservation efforts to ensure the birds that are housed in human care really are a viable backup should things get really bad for this animal out in its native range states. But without those original birds in captivity, those diving ducks that already existed in human care, that we can use as tools to trial our husbandry models, such conservation success, like the Madagascar pochard with its ducklings, simply would not have occurred. Conservation biology in ex situ populations is a mixture of theory and of applied approaches. This presentation has shown you that successful conservation action is based on long-term study, on involvement of all interested parties, to ensure that resources are consistently available that promote the likelihood of success. Collaboration between accredited zoos, NGOs, and all interested stakeholders is vital for the successful implementation of conservation action that can successfully reverse biodiversity loss.